they would want to be able to use a heavy hauler, use the heavier trucks to get from there to the intermodal.
Okay. Go ahead. I wasn't sure where you were going. I wasn't sure if it was
That's all right.
199th Street or 191st.
Yeah. What the BNS asked was to be approved to do this between Waverly and Four Corners. Actually, to strengthen the road between Waverly and Four Corners. Edgerton came back and said, well, we'll approve it if you improve the roadway all the way from Waverly. I misspoke. They were going to go from Waverly to the entrance of the BNSF. Edgerton came back and said, no, we'd like you to go from Waverly to Four Corners. And BNSF agreed to pay that incremental cost to improve the roadway. The roadway is currently under construction, so basically all they did, they had an engineer come in, redesign it, went from 11 inches of concrete up to 14 inches of concrete.
Just for that section?
Just for that section,
Okay.
right.
And then,
So, go ahead.
I was going to say, what about Homestead North from the
Right, from I-35.
Yeah, nothing there, but again, they're coming in at legal weights, dropping off at 191st and Waverly, repackaging,
Okay,
and
so
then
the
going
repackaging into highway.
going down to
Right,
191st
okay.
to get into the intermodal.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So that took care of the initial cost. Again, the BNSF agreed to pay this, and I probably shouldn't guess. I think it was less than $1 million. But I mean, it's a significant amount of money, several $100,000. But Edgerton looked at it, that okay, well, with these additional trucks, we're going to have additional maintenance in the future. How can we generate revenue to pay for that future maintenance that we're going to have? And my understanding is they haven't landed on an answer yet. I think they're leaning towards permitting. There's just lots of logistic problems trying to collect money, and we'll have the advantage of seeing what they do. So for us, again, I think I'm just trying to pass on the information I know about it. For us, at least I'm just thinking, well, it's logically, somebody's going to come down the pike here soon and say, well, we'd like to do the exact same thing a little farther down the road.
Right.
We'll have to figure out, okay, how do we handle that? Are we willing to pay the extra amount for a road? Because BNSF obviously won't be in the position to do that.
There is a grain transfer facility planned at 167th and Moonlight, roughly, in New Century, as I understand. Is that correct, Tom?
Yes.
Are they talking about heavy haul? Because I mean, go ahead.
They are in the process of operating a grain transfer station, but they will come in at legal weights, transfer that onto rail service, and then BNSF will take it
Oh,
off.
so they're going to move there. It's going to go to rail at that point.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
So I don't know if we were looking for any
No, we just want to provide an
more
update.
information.
On what it
of-
is. Okay, so essentially,
update.
if we were to, if there were a, or company that wanted to provide the same service, say, east, I don't know that they would want to locate that close, but east of that facility on 191st Street in the Gardner
Mhm.
area, that section of 191st from Gardner Road to Waverly will not be
Right.
to that level. Okay.
Or even if they bought land east of 35 in the area that David talked about and came south and back over across 199th, I mean, there's just a lot of ifs
Right.
that we've got to be prepared for from just the preliminary costs that we heard today in the meeting from a roadway perspective, and then sustainable maintenance and...
Now, granted, they were in an unusual position because the road's already being built, so they didn't have the opportunity to build their sub-base maybe stronger and not go to that 3 inches of concrete. I'm sure you could do it for less incremental costs than they did, but still, it's a lot of money.
It's just a dollar that we don't have now.
Yeah.
Yeah, and concrete maintenance is more than a simple asphalt overlay.
Well, you look at life cycle costs, and that varies. They're both, over life cycle costs are actually pretty competitive right
Okay.
now. But typically, when you're looking at the really heavy loads, concrete is
Your only option.
typically the better option. KDOT, they made an interesting comment today, because we were talking about, that they'll give a special permit at any time, and can for anything. But what they said was, well, if the load can be divided, then it's just flat out, they will not give you a special permit. So if they came in and said, I want to load 100,000 pounds of grain, they would just flat out and say no, because you can divide that to 80/20 or whatever.
Okay.
So what does a permit cost to go over the 80,000 pounds?
We didn't hear that.
For KDOT, he said it was like $5, it was some ridiculously low amount.
So-
Now, Edgerton hasn't even decided if they're going to a permit yet.
Right, but I mean, that would seem to indicate that they couldn't possibly justify the expense with $5.
Well, but
A permit.
this is what KDOT, and they admitted this was, and actually, did he say they slightly increased it? But still, it was next to nothing.
Right.
He said if he went to
No.
Missouri, the number to do it would be
So,
astronomically more than what Kansas
Like,
charges.
what is astronomically more?
I can't remember the number, I mean, he's talking
$100.
6 figures
Mhm.
at least. So,
So just to be clear, Edgerton has approved heavy hauling in essence
Yes.
in that area.
Yes.
They're looking at permitting to handle the ongoing maintenance costs
Correct.
of that area.
Correct.
Okay.
So does
Maintenance costs, sorry Larry, maintenance costs, and they also talked about policing that interchange 24/7 for also,
Violations.
absolutely.
But, so what, I mean, so you're talking violations, I mean, when you say heavy
Tags,
hauling,
weight,
how much
tread.
is that now? How much
um,
is that?
Beth Lynn has done some research on it. What she said today was that 88,000, or basically 10%, is typical, but she's also seen Chicago, 92, and even up to requests for over 100,000.
So when you say they would look at policing that, are they gonna look at policing the weight, or are they gonna look at policing whether people have permits?
All the above is.
Both.
Yes,
All of it?
both.
Yes.
And she brought Chicago as an example, that they to David's point, they actually have the roadways built so that overflow is able to stage off the side of the highway, and the troopers are writing them tickets for whatever they find. And there's troopers there 24/7, 7 days a week, as these guys and gals are entering and exiting, whether it's exporting or importing.
Right, yeah. So I think your question about fees, well, somebody would have to do a financial analysis on here's our future maintenance costs, and include costs for highway patrol or whatever whatever other costs are generated by it would have to be factored
So
in.
they're really looking at monitoring the road from Waverly to Homestead?
And down south to the interchange on Homestead Lane.
Well, I think there's monitoring regardless,
But from a heavy haul perspective?
from a heavy haul.
Yes.
You're right,
Yeah,
I'm
okay,
sorry.
sorry.
Yes.
Okay.
So where does says the road, I mean, does their area of responsibility end right at the west side of Waverly Road, or is it down the center line? I mean, are trucks going to be able, so is all of Waverly Road going to be 13 inches, was it 14 inches?
It's 191st.
It's not.
It's 191st.
East and
Yeah,
west.
so, yeah,
So the Waverly won't be heavy haul at all?
No.
they're going to take it through that intersection.
Moving
kind of
west.
Anticipating that, in the future, if there's a reason to, if somebody does come along farther to the east, then at least your intersection's already been built out.
But, so where does I guess I'm not sure I understand, the grain comes in off of the rail,
No.
Off
On the
the farm.
Off of a farmer's truck, so you've got 100 tons of wheat, you're gonna bring it into this staging area, they're gonna buy it from you, and then repackage it into a container and
the issue
drive
is
it.
that, if you take a container, 80,000 pounds of grain is not nearly close to a full container. So they can add that other 20,000 pounds to, from a volume perspective, to increase the efficiency of that container. However, in order to do that, you've got to get that container from that point to to the rail. Once it's on a rail car, and it goes to, it's heading out to Los Angeles, they're gonna pull it off the rail car, put it on a yard vehicle, and then move it to,
Container ship.
container ship.
So Homestead is the entry point. I mean, where's this grain coming from?
It's coming from the farmers.
I know,
there.
which road is it coming down?
I-35.
Into,
I-35 to
Oh,
whatever?
Yeah, through
Up I
Homestead.
35,
Right.
more than likely.
Yeah.
In small quantities.
Yeah.
It entered the site at, the proposed site, 191st and Waverly with legal loads. As I said, repackaging, the whole issue is the fact there's no direct access from DeLong to the BNSF site. They have to go out onto Edgerton's public road to get to the entry point to the BNSF site, which is basically 191st and Homestead. So the whole issue is just to go ahead, do a heavy load, which is legal for the rail, but an overload for the road, just to run down 191st Street to get in, but because they don't have direct access in. I think that's the whole issue. That basically, this particular instance is just in Edgerton. However, in our case, it's something we need to be cognizant of, because as
Who
things
knows what
develop,
will
we may end up having to deal with it in the future. Right now, we don't have an issue. It's totally within Edgerton.
How would we be dealing with it in the future?
Well, if we should get a development within Gardner or an area we should become Gardner that has a similar desire to repackage and get to the intermodal site, then we would have the issue to deal with.
Depends on what's happening, particularly at Waverly Road. That would be our closest point to them. When you start looking at any development that would be just east on the other side of Waverly Road, that's trying to do the same thing, because they already can get down 191st from that point. So the next property over would be the most likely site that someone would be looking to do the exact same thing.
do we, so then the northeast corner at like 191st and Waverly?
Yes.
How wide, so just on the diagram here, how many miles is it between Waverly Road and the next to where the city limits are? So where they might propose that sort of development, how many miles of road are we
They're
looking
1
at? Is
mile
that even
increments.
1 mile?
Yeah, they're 1 mile increments between Waverly and Gardner Road as an example. Is that correct, David?
That's correct.
So we're about half a mile of road before we run into the city limits of Gardner?
That's
That
correct.
we'd have
Plus
to
or
turn
minus.
in high,
Yes.
Current with city limits.
Currently,
Depending on, exactly, depending on.
And/or
Right.
annexation.
But that, right now, as we look at, that's the only piece of that road that they would look at, heavyweight road, that's not already be taken care of between Edgerton and BNSF, because they're going to develop all the way over to Waverly, correct?
191st.
That's the way, 191st.
The issue where it would come for us is, depending on where,
If somebody
Boundaries end up.
outside of
What's your
191st.
boundary?
if someone's to develop outside of Edgerton off of 191st Street, and it happens to be in Gardner or a future Gardner,
Right,
it's an issue we will need to be aware of. Right now, it's not an issue for us,
right.
but it could be.
But we're only, we're only looking at this heavyweight load on 191st. We're not looking at any other roads leading into it. It's just 191st.
At this point, Heath, you're correct, but long-term, I think you're incorrect, because again, if a vendor came in and wanted a staging area to give DeLong some competition, and they wanted to do it on the east side of 35 and somewhere along either 199th or 191st, we're gonna be on the hook to get that road up to par, to get it from point A to point B.
Or we say it's not allowed.
Or it's not allowed, or if you want, it's part of your development cost to develop this piece. Do cities do that as well? We'd love to have you there, but
Well, that's what
we've got
I-
80,000 pound capacity. If you want special permits to go over, then here's the cost to develop that road, because right now it's not structured.
Well, I think the other thing we need to think about too is that, when we talk about this, it's always focused around grain. So, what about those haulers that are bringing in from the fields that might want to be a little more efficient on a trip?
Mhm.
I don't know what the issue is with an existing grain trailer, but, is a grain trailer capable of holding more than 80,000 pounds? And if so, then there would be incentive not to come up I-35 and not to come up Homestead, because that's where the inspection stations are. The incentive would be to come up Gardner Road to 191st and over. So we need to think about, from an enforcement standpoint, do we want to consider portable scales and,
Well, I think we need to.
you know, and
Yes.
selective.
But also, we need to think about how we're gonna promote that undeveloped area to be able to bring in that business versus limiting ourselves, based on what I've heard.
Well, the other thing that's critical is, we don't want to have the city at an unfair advantage because the boundaries right now for the city limits for both sides are undecided.
Right.
So if you have a business owner that's looking at boundaries, and the new annexation laws, as I understand them, allow them to kind of decide, depending on if they're contiguous, we don't want to be at a disadvantage because they're deciding they want to annex to the west. So I think this kind of leads into, you know, some of the things that we talked about with, as we start to look at annexation, as we start to look at growth, as we start to talk about visioning, that we really want to be very strategic in how we decide what policy decisions we want to make.
I've got to say that the only contract that's signed at the intermodal is DeLong still currently, right? And just from the discussion we're having, it sounds like we're pouring 3 more inches of concrete on there, specifically for them, unless they have some kind of idea that other grain companies are going to want to locate in that southwest corner of the intermodal or just outside of it.
I think it's just a timing issue. I mean, BNSF is just, they're paying for it, and it just happens to be the road hasn't been built yet, so.
Yeah, but they wouldn't just build this for DeLong, would they?
Well, the other thing is, while you already have DOT contractors staged out there, and you're talking about an incremental difference in terms of economies of scale of getting the road up to a standard for future potential development, it's a very cost-effective and efficient thing to be doing, even if you don't have contracts signed. Just because you've got the contractors out there, it's already bidded, you know, you can,
Okay.
the design work, it's very wise to be able to go.
Build it and they will come.
Exactly. That's what's happening.
And it could be more than just grain and
could
other
be
farm
other
products.
products.
It could be a bunch of chickens, or it could be Slade, or, I mean, it could be all kinds of things. The example we heard in the meeting today was, we're exporting most of this to overseas, Asia Pacific, and they were importing, what was it, Slade, I believe?
Tiles.
Or tile, thank you.
Yeah.
So, you know.
Okay, so you could be pulling tile off of a
Off of-
rail car, taking it to a
To
warehouse.
a staging area to break it
Yeah.
down into 2 containers as an example, to meet the DOT regs.
Okay. Okay.
So it's not just export, in my mind, it's
Import opportunity.
import as well.
Okay. Any other questions for?
Do you have any estimates of costs? I mean, does Edgerton have any estimates of the cost of policing and maintaining those roads? I mean, if, even with BNSF paying for the road itself, what is the cost to maintain it and police it? And
I don't,
'cause what I read in that report that was on Edgerton's site, or maybe it was on the Gardner News site, I think. Yeah, it sounded like it's pretty costly to monitor the traffic,
it is very costly.
especially when you don't have a police force.
It is costly. I don't know if they've got cost estimates. I do know that they're looking at, you know, the need to have to increase, you know, to have some staffing to be able to do that. And while they were considering the vendor opportunity for permits, I know that they were also looking at perhaps having a third party do that for them.
And I do know that, yeah, as far as issuing and collecting the fees
Yes.
and so on, I do know that the sheriff's department currently has trained staff and equipment to be able to set up portable scales.
And they talked about that?
Yeah, so they do have that capability now, and I know that obviously Highway Patrol has that same capability, they are currently contracted with the sheriff's department for law enforcement.
Yeah, well, and the other thing, I did a right along with the police, and one of the guys the guy that I was riding with was talking about the kind of fines that end up getting weighed down upon these truck drivers or the trucking companies when they make a stop. You know, they've got all kinds of lights all over them that ought to be operating, brakes that should be doing certain things, weights that they're supposed to be. I mean, they can weigh them down. They make a truck stop, they're weighing somebody down with a whole bunch of tickets. I mean, I know that Chief Francis has always considered, you know, we don't want to look at the public safety as a revenue generator, but it's a revenue generator.
Well, I think in that particular case, it should be a deterrent.
Right.
Right.
You know, I think that's the message is that, you know, if you have some folks that are kind of skating the weight limits and coming in, if there's some significant enforcement frequently, that message travels quickly.
Sure.
And so I think that's the other key is, you know, if we do think about this, if we do consider that if that's the direction we want to go, we want to, create a permitting scheme that generates revenue
Yes.
to deal with the incremental maintenance cost. And then we also want to have a enforcement scheme that adds to prevention and encourages prevention. So I think that's probably a
Well, and
strategy.
with that said, Mayor, I mean, I think, you know, Cheryl and her team should take a look at that in a proactive stance and know that Hetcherton's looking at it
Right.
from both a safety perspective as well as a revenue generator, offset some of their, you know,
Right.
large costs that they're looking at. And I don't think that we should wait for them to, you know, tell us how they did it. I think we need to be right in line and take a look at that, because at the end of the day, folks are gonna try to, as you said, skate by, you know, these weigh stations, and whether it's
Well,
you know,
I mean-
individual farmers or professional truck drivers or what have you. I mean, we've got to be prepared for that.
That happens today.
Oh, no, absolutely.
So it's, and that might be something that, you know, in conversations with Beth, that we, you know, encourage them to you know, elevate their,
Well,
so that they're, you know, so they're setting up a situation.
Precedent.
A precedent that helps the,
I kind of wonder, speaking to your point, I'm kind of wondering if maybe we ought to be talking with them about.
They're
what
open
they
to
are.
talk.
But, yeah, because, at the end of the day, I don't think, you know, we want to be playing we don't want the developers and the haulers to be playing us and
one side
Hetcherton
against the other.
against each other.
Exactly, right.
We still need the hardware, even if the dollar amounts are equal, we still need the hardware, we still need to look at projected staff, training, et cetera, in order to facilitate that, even if it's all, you know, a flat rate.
Yeah, and if they do, if Edgerton goes with a third party, is there opportunity to get a partner with that third party? You know, all of those things, I think we should be having that conversation as they go through the process, I agree.
Cheryl, one of the
Okay.
things, I know Chief Francis sent somebody through that specific training on this. I wonder if it would be beneficial for that person or even Chief Francis, whoever, to come and talk to us about the different options and the things that they look for,
Okay.
just to kind of educate
Okay.
us on that process.
All right.
Yeah, and actually, I think they ended up sending a second person.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if
And-
they're done yet, but,
The other thing is that I think maybe we should have them check into cost on portable scales.
Right.
I
We've done
did a
that.
little looking
We've done
already.
yeah,
It's,
it's pretty inexpensive.
yeah, I
In the
was
grand
very
scheme,
surprised.
Yeah,
We've
in
done
the
it.
grand
Work on
scheme
that.
it is.
Yeah.
So I'll have them come.
Okay, great,
There's a
thank you.
calibration that needs to occur and so on, but
Sure.
the actual
Okay.
capital cost is fairly reasonable. Okay? Great, well, thank you.
Okay.
Very informative. Thank you all very much, appreciate it, and have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, how are you?
Hey, Mark, how are you? Not for work session.
Okay, one.
No, not this time.
Okay. All right. Okay, all right. Then let us know. I definitely want to.